Oh yeah. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to come talk to you. And I'm not going to throw a whole bunch of science at you today. I'm going to tell you some struggles that the scientists are going through. I'm going to tell you a little bit about me as a scientist. I'm here representing a lot of scientists who are independent scientists. Apparently, it is a surprise to people that people are scientists who don't work for BP. I don't work for BP. I also don't work for the federal government's NRDA process. That's the Natural Resources Damage Assessment process. I work completely independent. So both of those two things that I just mentioned, working for BP, lots of scientists have been actually, I called snatched up. They're making $250 and $300 an hour. And they are gathering data to support BP's part of the litigation that will occur. The Department of Justice is on the other side of this, and they have scientists who are collecting data for their part of the litigation to defend the environment and to come up with the costs of the destruction. And then there's people in the middle, and I'm not involved in either of those processes because I like to test hypotheses. I'm taking you back to 6th grade where you learned about the scientific method. And we are asking questions. BP's drilling disaster, I don't call it an oil spill actually because it's not a spill, it's not a contained amount, it's a gusher, it's a drilling disaster, it's a rupture in the earth. It's very important that I tell people as a scientist I'm not willing to call it a spill. And in fact, when I am here probably because I had an op-ed published in the New York Times that it got a lot of attention. It got more attention than I ever expected it to. And one of the things I made sure the editors knew is that I was unwilling to call it a spill because as a scientist we try to choose our words very carefully, and it is not a spill, it's a drilling disaster. So back to being, your 6th grade science class here. I'm interested in testing hypotheses, and this provides, it's a horrible, horrible thing that happened, and it provides us an opportunity. Now, to give you an idea, the MC mentioned that I actually get out there and I study insects, and people are like, yeah, who cares about the bugs? They're, these dragonflies are everywhere. But it turns out they're really, really important. And I work amongst a group of people who will look at oysters. I have people who are looking at the quality of the plants. When plants are very stressed, they do things chemically, and we can measure this. So we are measuring a whole lot of things. Well, in order to do that, we have to have access to the area. And so one of the things I wrote about in the New York Times was asking for open access. Because I have a graduate student that came from China to work with me because I'm known for my work on hurricanes and the effect on the environment and other disturbances and how they affect the environment. I'm basically a disturbance ecologist, and he came from China to work with me in Louisiana in what he calls the greatest wetlands in the world. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about why he's right that Louisiana's wetlands are the greatest wetlands in the world and how important they are. But he came here and we set out before, when this happened, I had some former students that told me, hey, you know what, this is going to be bigger than people think it's going to be. They were out there on the boats and looking at the amount of oil that was coming out. And so we got out there and we ran around trying to collect data. And my student was blocked from collecting data in South Alabama. Okay, his samples were taken away from him, and he was shown away from the area. We have multiple times driven down into areas of South Louisiana to get into the marshes to try to measure what's going on before oil made landfall in some of these areas, and we've been shut out by sheriff's deputies. And when we asked them what the problem was, is they were under instructions from BP to block people who were not part of Incident Command, which is BP, and the NRDA process, which is the government's measurement of what's going on. So this is we've been blocked from the area. So all I asked for was equal access so we can actually test hypotheses and have a scientific open discussion. Before I get into why people who work for BP directly or for the NERDA process can't have an open discussion, let me tell you about why Louisiana swamps and marshes are the greatest place to work in the world, and why they should matter to people here in Washington, people in Iowa, and people in Montana, and people in California, and Hawaii, and Alaska. They are the kidneys of this country. And when I say that, is if you have kidneys, 2 of them, okay, we can live with 1 kidney, but we can't live with no kidneys, okay? People have to go to the doctor and go dialysis. Your kidneys filter out all the waste products from your body. That's exactly what these wetlands are doing. Those marshes in South Louisiana are so important to filter all the waste products that are coming down off the Mississippi, that are coming off the farmland in the heartland of the United States and from the cities of the United States. And those marshes are protecting the Gulf, and they're super important. Now, another way to think of them in kind of a reverse manner is they actually are kind of like skin. You know, your skin protects your body from intrusions from the outside. Well, that's another thing that these marshes do, is they're protecting all of the south of Louisiana and inland from the onslaught of storm surge and land loss, and because of the hurricanes that happen in the Gulf. So they're vitally important. We can't live without our kidneys. We can't live without our skin. This country, if we lose these marshes, we are in trouble. Okay, let's go back to now I made it really, hopefully I've impressed upon you how important these marshes are in the areas that are affected by oil. Let me tell you a little story real quick. Kendra and I were actually in the marsh as she described last Friday, which is literally the day before yesterday. And when somebody tells you, which is what I've heard in the media, that the marshes are recovering, I'm going to tell you as an ecosystem biologist that what they are not seeing what I saw. And if you talk to me, I can show you pictures on my camera where the marsh grass is completely laid down because it's covered with heavy degraded oil. It's black. The oil, the grass should be green. And it's like, the grass is, we talk about grass, and it's not like a grassy field that you can run through. It's like sticks, and they're hollow, and there's, of course, all kinds of wonderful creatures that live inside this grass. And that is all laid down. And the boom has been pushed up by either high tide or storm surge in these areas. And then what will happen is there'll be another high tide or there'll be another storm surge. And it doesn't require a hurricane to come into the Gulf. It's just another little tropical storm or something like that. And it's going to leapfrog and push the oil further into the marsh. And because that grass that's at the marsh edge is laying flat, it's going to continue to be able to intrude further into the marsh as the hurricane season goes on. That lasts till November 1st. We actually December 1st. Last year we had a storm that we thought was going to come in after December 1st. So it can last all the way to the end of the year. It's a really big problem. So that many areas of the marsh that we were in was black as far as you could see along the edge of the marsh in every direction that you looked. And they're my fellow scientists who are saying, oh, you can see sprigs of marsh grass growing, the marsh is recovering. Not in the area that I was at. I saw maybe one area that was lightly oiled that was like that, but there are extensive areas of the marsh that are black with oil. And I haven't been able to analyze what we have yet, but I'm not confident that all of our creatures that are supposed to be there are there. So back to working for BP and working for the government's part of the litigation, the Natural Resource Damage Assessment. So let me tell you a little bit about how science works with this. If the people who are my colleagues that are making $250, $300 an hour as consultants for BP They have signed a 3-year confidentiality agreement. That means that there's no discussion. Like, I can't go up to them and have a conversation with them in the hallway. That also means that they can't present at meetings and they can't publish their work. Well, as scientists, we have this check and balance system where we peer review work. And that is not happening. So another scientist can't go to them and say, hey, wait a minute, I don't think you're analyzing your data correctly. And we do this all the time. And we criticize each other. It's very cutthroat, very critical. And that's not happening. So these people can find whatever data and nobody is checking it. There's no checks and balance there. On the other side, the natural resources damage assessment requires another confidentiality agreement. That one has no end until the Department of Justice says you can then now discuss and present your data. So this whole thing is being done in a shroud of secrecy. Yes. And I'm trying to I don't do science like that. I don't do anything in secret. I am going to discuss my work with colleagues. I couldn't come today if I was part of that. And you all will see my data. If anybody wants to see my data, I'll show it to them at any time. My colleagues have the right to criticize how I've collected or analyzed my data, and I will certainly take what they say into account. There will be no secrecy. And scientists who do this are having a little bit of trouble getting funding, as you can imagine. There's very few venues for us to go out there and get the money that we need to do this, and we're still working on this. Now, I will tell you that, you know, I feel like a little mouse, and then I kind of bit the lion in the tail. My op-ed piece got a lot of attention. Let me tell you, it went online on the New York Times, buried in the New York Times, on Tuesday, the 24th of August. The next morning, when it was published, at 7 a.m., I heard from the chief scientist at BP. He wanted to solve all my problems, okay? So I started a conversation with him and said, well, you know, it's not my problem, it's also everybody else's problem. So I thought we were going to have a conversation, and we still might be going to have a conversation about how to open this up a little bit. I'm being met right now with radio silence. So I will tell you, though, that BP, it appears, now this is a report in Newsweek, so I haven't gotten direct confirmation of this, but it appears they're reducing their confidentiality agreements and loosening that up a little bit, and I'm hopeful for that, but all I'm doing is a call to allow the scientists to go in there and measure, and for us to be able to tell the truth to the people. I work at I didn't actually introduce myself very well, but I work at Louisiana State University, and I'm paid through state tax dollars and federal tax dollars. So I feel like I work for the people, and they have a right to know what is going on, and we are, as scientists, I work in a group of 10 scientists that are independent, and there's many more of us who are telling the truth, and we promise to you that we will tell the truth.
Thank you.
That's it.